Hello and welcome to this video for OCR A-Level Sociology. In this video I'm going to look at how to structure the 20-mark question for Component 1 Section A of your A-Level, which is the Culture, Socialisation and Identity paper. So what does this question ask? It asks you to outline and briefly evaluate the view. It's worth 20 marks and you should spend about 20 minutes on it in your exam. The question is likely, although not definitely, to be about one identity. So by identity we mean ethnicity, class, gender and so on. And it will be asking you whether this identity is reinforced by society and reinforced by the agents of socialisation, or whether it's changing. So how are the marks divided up for this question? You get 8 marks for AO1, 8 marks for AO2 and 4 marks for AO3. And what does this mean? So AO1 is asking you for your knowledge and understanding. You need to show the examiner that you know about some studies, some concepts and some sociologists. AO2 is about application. So that's about linking to the question. It's about answering the question. So you need to be showing the examiner that you know how what you're writing answers the question. You're not just writing down everything you know about that particular topic. And AO3 is worth 4 marks, and this is analysis and evaluation. For this question, they're asking you for the arguments against the main view of the question. As you can see, this is only 4 marks, so you need less content against the main view of the question than in favour, because as you know, it asks you to briefly evaluate. Okay, so how should you structure the question? You should start, we advise, with a short introduction where you define the key term and you outline the debate at hand. You then need 5 Peel paragraphs. As you probably know, by Peel we mean point, evidence, explain and link back to the question. Your 5 paragraphs should contain 3 paragraphs for the view in the question and 2 points evaluating or going against the view of the question. You should then finish off with a short conclusion with a final verdict. Probably the best way of explaining how to structure and answer this question is to look at a real exam question. So we've taken the one from the June 2017 sample paper, which is outline and briefly evaluate the view that social class is a strong influence on an individual's identity. So in this question, the view of the question is that social class is reinforced by the agents of socialisation, that social class is still important in today's society. So you're going to need to give 3 arguments in favour of this point of view and 2 arguments against, which is 2 arguments saying that social class is no longer important or that social class identity is changing in modern society. Alright, so let's look at an example introduction for this question. As you can see, it starts off by defining social class. It then goes on to explain what the debate is. So the debate is between whether social class shapes our identity through family, education and the media, or whether social class is no longer so important in postmodern society. So here in this introduction, they've outlined the debate between those 2 points of view. Let's look at an example of a paragraph in favour of the point of view of the question. So this paragraph is an example, just one example, of a paragraph arguing that social class is important in modern society. And the student has used evidence from Pierre Bourdieu's study, and Pierre Bourdieu argues that social class is still important because it's reproduced through the education system. So he argues that middle class people bring cultural capital to school and that this fits in with the middle class culture of the school, and that working class people have a cultural deficit when they come to school because their skills and their knowledge and their culture doesn't fit in with that middle class culture. So Bourdieu argues that working class people are set up to fail within school, and so middle class people are more likely to do better in society. Okay, if we look at this paragraph in a little bit more detail then, it starts off with the main point from Peel, and the main point of the paragraph is that social class is still important as an identity because it is reproduced through our education system. The paragraph then goes on to give evidence and to explain that evidence. And the evidence, as mentioned, is Bourdieu's arguments, and the student has used some concepts such as cultural reproduction, cultural capital, cultural deficit, and the idea of alienation, that working class people feel alienated by the middle class nature of schooling. So this represents the evidence, the E, and the explain, the second E of the Peel in your Peel structure for the paragraph. And finally, the student links back to the question, which is the L of Peel, by saying that Bourdieu shows us how the education system reproduces the traditional class structure, which means that social class does still have a strong influence on people's life experiences and, crucially, on their identities. Okay, let's now have a look at one example of a paragraph against the main view of the question. And this paragraph is using the argument that because people no longer have one job for life and they no longer often work full time, they do not identify so much as one particular social class. So the student starts off again by making the point that because society is changing and class structures are breaking down, social class no longer has such a significant influence. So this is the point against the view of the question. The student then uses offer as some evidence against the view of the question and offers argument that social class is fragmenting, and that we're no longer clearly defined by having a common experience of work. The student uses some concepts to back up their evidence, and this would be the evidence and the explanation, the EE of the Peel paragraph. And then finally, the student links back again to the question by saying that social class doesn't have such a strong influence on our identity because the structure of society has become so much more complex and work has changed, meaning that people are less likely to identify strongly with one particular social class. So this is the paragraph against the main view of the question, or this is an example paragraph against. So lastly, let's have a very quick look at an example of a conclusion. In this conclusion, the student has argued firstly that social class does shape a person's identity through education because the education system reproduces our class identity. But however, that because we live in a postmodern world, we no longer base our identity on things like work, but more on on the products we consume, and that this has become a much more important way of shaping our identity rather than class. However, the student cleverly finishes off by pointing out that we can't consume items if we don't have any money. And so in that respect, social class is still important because if we're in poverty, we can't shape our identity through consumption. Okay, so I hope this has given you an idea of how to structure the 20-mark question for Component 1, Section A of the A-Level OCR Sociology exam. Thank you.